the structure.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we've had recurring guests, and I thought it was pretty cool when they told me we might get you on 3 or 4 times. So I'm sure you have many stories to tell. Are you staying in touch with like you're friendly with like I know Beth Gibbons and that gang. You're like really close with that group, right?
Yeah, I mean, the adaptation world, I feel like was really small for a long time. So those of us who started back in the day, the Kara Pikes, the Beth Gibbons, Missy Stoltz, Rosina Beerbaum, Susie Mosier, all kind of still working on the same stuff.
So we've had Susie on here. That was a fun conversation, and then we did this. I don't know if you heard about it, but we did this like women in adaptation, and we had Missy on, we had Emily Wasley, we had Beth, and so there's 5 or 6 like.
I watched it.
Oh, okay,
Jessica
okay.
Kranick was on it too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, that was fun to. We just said here. I wasn't even going to be part of it. It's just like you guys take over and just chat what you want to chat about. So that was kind of a fun thing to do.
It was a good one. I got to see Grannis actually afterwards and go hiking with her. So
Well, now you're in Baltimore, right?
I am.
So do you live in Baltimore?
I do.
Okay. Well, I lived in Tacoma Park for a while, just in Maryland, so
Yeah.
not too far. I'm in Tucson, Arizona. Moved here a couple of years ago.
Nice. I went to school in Tempe, so I've spent a bit of time in Tucson as well.
Okay, so Tempe, you're hotter up there in Phoenix. We in Tucson, we're like Tucson's hot, but like Phoenix, we're just like, oh, that's a different level of hot. It's like 8 to 10 degrees. Actual, it's hard to believe, but it's like 8 to 10 degrees warmer up there. So
Yeah, I think Tucson's more pretty. Also, it's a beautiful with the canyons and the mountains.
I'm in the Northeast, right at the foothills of the Catalinas, and like I do my exercise is going up these foothills like 3 or 4 times a week, and I that's why I moved out here. It's like I got the Mid Atlantic kind of depressed me, and I'm just like I got to get out of this rain and all that, and I miss the people because when you're in that the Beltway kind of area, even where you're at, there's just some interesting people doing some really cool things, but the weather just crushed my soul. So.
Yeah, we've got Kathy Jacobs out there. You guys can talk all about the doom and gloom together.
Well, I see her on occasion. I mean, of course, on the last year, they'll host a workshop and I'll see her, but we don't really cross paths that much. I've kind of connected with the urban planning. Do you ever run across Lad Keith? Does that name ring a bell? He's a professor at University.
Yeah, Vlad was in one of the sessions. So I was out there working with Leslie Ethan recently in January, actually, and I believe there was some connection to some of the work there.
Okay, and he got invited onto some panel for the city of Miami. They were doing some work down there, and so he was there. And anyway, he's been like he came on the podcast, and so yeah, I guess I've been hanging out with urban planning, kind of seeing because he's been kind of keeping me in the loop a bit more. So, but I know, and Kathy, I think spends half the year in maybe Maine or something. Do you know? Does that sound right?
I thought it was Massachusetts, but all the M's, there's lots of them.
Right.
Although doing what you do, I'm surprised you moved out to the
I know. Listen, go ahead, give it to me. Go on. Move to the drought-prone areas. I get it.
Everybody's got to be someplace.
Well, I did. It was a weather issue. My family, we moved out here, and it was either I'm originally from Florida, and it was Florida or Arizona, and so both were. I was just liable for, sea level rise or whatever. And now this is drought, so I'm just like, and there's too many just yahoos down. I'm a Floridian. I can say that. Just I'm like I can't go back to Florida. Just I can't. It crushed my soul. One
That's
sec.
fair.
Let me just check in with Megan real quick. Megan, I know you can hear me. Do you see the name
Okay.
tags on? Are we going to keep those in there, or you want to crop those out? Okay. Well, we're going to keep the name tags on. All right. I'm sorry. It's always kind of unsettling when someone takes over your computer, but Megan does a great job. So we've got another 2 or 3 minutes. So are you pretty much? They have you. Your organization though? Are they based in Detroit? Do I have that right?
USDN is actually an organization that isn't based anywhere.
Oh, okay.
We've always been virtual.
Okay, so you've
Yeah.
just been able to, do you have an office space, or you've always worked from home?
When I've worked for USDN, I've always worked from home, but I also traveled about 2/3 of the year.
Oh,
So this
wow.
has been a massive transition for me. I mean, I've seen you at different events, but you have the adaptation forums, you have the working with the members. Like there was just so much travel. So I was not in this space as much as I am now.
Yeah, and so it's they made the right call, especially with how poorly we've handled the pandemic. But like when they first said they're going to delay the adaptation form, I'm like, hey, that's a year and a half out. You're being premature, and I was sort of disappointed. But then you know what? That April's way too soon. We'll be lucky to have half the vaccines out by then, if we're lucky. So.
Yeah, and we have to get to 5 billion, so that's going to take some time.
We have it's interesting though. We have quite a few members on our team here in Simpatico from Bangladesh. You probably interacted with them when they first reached out with you, and
Mhm.
they plan on getting out the vaccine in January, and I thought that was great. I'm encouraged that different countries. I heard some oh, they're not going to get it in that country till midway through the year because they can't pay for it or they can't get access to it. So I'm hoping that's the case, that some of these countries are actually getting much earlier access than I thought. So
Yeah, I think the Gates Foundation has really taken that upon themselves to try to utilize the scale in which they were already engaging with a lot of the communities, especially in Africa, to get the vaccine out. So hopefully that's still the case.
so do you guys get money from Gates? Are they funding? No, okay. They've been getting into the climate space more and more, and maybe some urban area, but I haven't obviously followed that closely. I'm just curious. Um, and then the Amazon money just came out a few weeks ago, and I know a few people at World Wildlife Fund, and they got a big chunk of money. And what about America DApps? Why is it getting Amazon? The little one-person shop. Come on, where's the
Yeah, I have I'm sure you'll hear this come out in the interview a bit, but I have a hard time with the continuation of funding the very big sort of top down um, structures because we haven't been successful to date, and we need to be reframing the way that I think money is distributed and also the way it's utilized. So
So, but basically, what you're saying is that like giving it to those massive groups, that's just a poor use of the money. That's what you mean.
I think I'm glad we're not recording, and I think that
It's okay. I mean, that's
it
it's
could
enough.
be better if it was put into a structure where lots of different organizations were able to come together, and it also went to the community-based partners, community-based groups in the areas that are going to be impacted most, rather than a lot of the DC-led and structured organizations that have been around for a long time and haven't been as effective as they need to be.
No, no, I agree. And the advantage to some of those groups is that they do have networks that can do things at a big scale, but like some of them are so top heavy and there's such momentum to how they do things and that they stifle. And I think we're going to talk about that too, is about innovation, is like that it's just not a buzzword. Being innovative is, necessary. And yeah, I totally agree. It's just, I'm like, look at all the money that they're getting. And oh, that CEO gets $900,000 a year, but on the flip side, I also believe people in environmental sector should be getting paid a lot more, and maybe that's why we don't attract certain people. It's like, oh well, we'll pay them 42 grand, and they're doing it because it's the mission, and it's like, you know what? That's not good enough. You need to start paying really well, and I think the foundations are play a big part in maybe keeping those salaries down. Is anyone from Big Foundation listening? It's all right. I've long since given up with the foundation. I've had them on the podcast a bit, and I had Walton Foundation on, and I don't. They're kind of a mysterious foundation. I don't know if you've dealt with them much, but I had them on, and it was kind of nice because I'm like, I'm not getting any money from them, so I was able to kind of push a bit. So those are fun
Oh,
conversations.
good.
All right, so I think we're ready to go. Let me just give me a like 30 seconds here, okay? Let's get my act together.
Yeah.
And going to. All right, so I'm going to start the episode, and like I said, there'll be it won't be too long, but it'll be just obvious when I introduce you, and I'll see you on the other side.
Sounds good.
Hey adapters, welcome back. Today our guest is Kristen Baja. Baja works at the Urban Sustainability Directors Network as their program director for climate resilience. She's responsible for helping cities identify strategic ways to advance climate resilience planning and implementation and building their capacity to take proactive action. Baja focuses her time centering racial equity in all resilience, mitigation, and sustainability work. Baja will share USDN's unique approach to climate resilience with a young practitioner-led network focusing on innovation and pushing against the norms. Baja talks about how this network implements hazard mitigation plans with a focus on racial equality and shifting traditional power structures to the community and community partners. Hey Baja, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Good to see you.
It is great, and we see each other at different events, and I don't feel like, it's a chance for us to really kind of talk for, I think, the first time on these kind of issues. So I'm excited about that. We know a lot of the same people. But let's just jump right in. What is this Urban Sustainability Directors Network?
Yeah, so USDN is a small and intimate local government practitioner-led network. We are focused on accelerating the pace of action on racial equity, climate action, and sustainability. It was started in 2008 when a handful of sustainability directors came together. Their positions were really new and they didn't have any support or guidance that really said, oh, this is what you're supposed to do in this role. So they came together to form this network and really to be change agents. They wanted to share and collaborate. And so the network itself is it's centered on peer exchange and innovation and really getting to implementation of holistic equity-centered action on climate change and sustainability. Local governments have this powerful capacity for change, and they can continue to actively work on human health, climate change, decarbonization, racial equity without leadership from the federal government, as we've seen. And so our network is small and nimble. It's built on trust and relationships, and many of our members actually become lifelong friends. In fact, I was a member of the network for the city of Baltimore for 5 years before joining on as staff at USDN. But I'm really fortunate now to be in the role of supporting a lot of my good friends and colleagues in this sort of proactive action. And we actually have grown from a network of around 8 in 2008 to now a network of 240 local governments with about 1,600 active members in North America.
Okay, so how long have you been there, though?
I've been with USDN for over 3 years.
Okay, so it's still a relatively young organization. So you're an old timer already with 3 years, I'm sure. And I was curious about that as I was poking around the idea of being a member. You're a staffer, obviously, but what does it really mean to be a member? Are you just signing up to something? Are entities members, or is it always individuals?
They're local government practitioners, usually sustainability directors or somebody with a title that's working on climate change, resilience, racial equity. Our members are essentially just the core member is somebody that we ask to actively engage in the network. So to be available to their peers, to provide information on the website, to come and engage in the processes and the programs, because it is a lot of peer generated information. A lot of the innovation is identified by the members, and a lot of the work that we do is identified by the members. In fact, it's a entirely member-led network. So everything that we do is identified through surveys and our planning committee and other groups. So that's what makes us different, is I think it's that relationship. It's those times that we take to get to know each other. It's that trust building, but it's also the ability to call somebody up in a position very similar to yours and say, can you send me this? Have you done it before? And have them send it to you 30 seconds later.
All right, imagine if it started in 2008 in the sustainability network, there's been a transition to, people that have been doing adaptation for 10 years, you're considered an old timer. And so sustainability has been around a lot longer. How did your organization sort of make that pivot? Because it sounds like resilience and climate change and adaptation is a big part of it. Do they see those kind of interchangeable, like the, sustainability and adaptation? How did that kind of unfold with the organization?
Yeah, I think everything is grounded in sustainability, right? And sustainability is similar to the word resilience, where I think it's everything in a lot of ways. Like, we want more sustainable systems, we want more resilient systems. We have climate change impacts everything. Racial equity impacts everything. So it's really important. I think we're looking at sort of these complex and multi-layered local government systems that are embedded in other layers of government. And our members are focused more on pushing for change and adaptability in a very hierarchical system. And so they operate at this small scale on the ground, where they can intimately interact with residents and community-based organizations and those who are on the front lines of our most pressing challenges, like lack of affordable housing and racism and climate change. But they're ultimately the ones who also need to collaborate with our frontline communities to identify and implement solutions together. So I don't know if we've ever shifted away from sustainability. It is still the grounding core component of what we're doing, but it is also embedded in all the climate work, all of our racial equity work, everything that we're trying to do in local government. And in that, we're working a lot in the gray space of trying to navigate between these different levels and layers, and thinking from the 30,000-foot view to try to solve the climate crisis, while at the same time ensuring that people's trash are picked up. And so when you're looking at 2-year projects and thinking big picture around more equitable and just systems, it is more sustainable, and it is more resilient, and it is looking at climate change. So I think that that's the key, is that we've never really let go of our core components and our foundation. It's just the language has evolved and changed, and that's how we have as well.
And a lot of the material you sent us, you're out there working with individuals, these workshops, and I think the conferences and such. How is that process? Because it's hard enough. Like, let's say you're working with a city and the policymakers, the people that are supposed to care about all these different issues. When you're getting down to the even the individual and community member, how do you communicate the issue, I guess, of climate change in these urban areas? I mean, is it a hard thing to sort of say this is an important issue and let's come together? Or are they kind of coming to you? What's going on with the communication of that?
From the members themselves?
Well, I guess my point is it's sometimes it's hard enough for people like in the cities that even run things to start thinking about climate change. And so working with actual community members, and there's an awareness, I guess, phase of what you're doing. Like, this is what climate change is going to mean for this community, because not everyone knows it, and it's chicken and egg kind of thing.
Yeah, I think what we're doing with sort of communications in support of our members is to understand that actually we're not starting with climate change. We're actually grounding in human needs and human quality of life, and the need for humans to thrive amidst our changing climate conditions. And so in that, we actually prioritize racial equity at the core of all of our climate and sustainability work, and that has evolved over the last 10 years. But it actually grounds the work in sort of the everyday needs of humans, these needs that already are not being met. And so as we've seen with the pandemic, it's not around something that's going to happen in 2050. It's happening now. We already have unjust systems. We already have inequity. We already have people not getting access to the resources and having health impacts. And so it's a piece of focusing on the sort of need to balance the right now and the need for people to survive in the everyday and meeting those everyday human needs, in addition to what we're looking at as the cure, these big lofty goals of reduction of 80% by 2050, and finding and working within that gray space. And so as far as communications, a lot of our members will actually start with, here is a plan we were told by council that we have to create, or here is a policy we want to get through. And when they come into the network, they're actually coming in and immediately completing a 5-part series that we call Equity Foundations, learning about the true history of this country and how it was founded for one user group and these white male landowners, and that has perpetuated inequity and created racist policies and practices that we all now live and function within. And so in providing that training and that support and that coaching, we're also opening up the range of what they're actually working on, and often altering the work and thinking beyond a plan or beyond a policy. How are we actually thinking about the whole process and breaking down the systems that we currently function within, while at the same time making sure people's needs are met?
Well, I know racial equity is the big part of what you're doing there, but those must be challenging conversations. You probably have to just, think about it in many different ways. Lots of just, I'm sure there's probably partners that you bring in to help you do these things, but it must be a challenging core part of what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I'm a white woman living in a white body. The challenge for me, I'm very, very privileged, and I think it's acknowledging the privilege of carrying around the body that I do. It's really important, though, to be using my privilege and my positionality to have these conversations and to reground the fact that climate change and environmental justice and racial inequity are the same. They're the same problems. They come from the same legacy of extraction of both land and people. And so it's certainly work that I think is really important. I think it's got to be grounded in racial equity first and foremost. And I work with a really amazing team of people, including Capua Consulting, that support our members in one-on-one coaching, that provide these foundation trainings, that we have core principles that anybody who joins our network knows that our work is grounded in. And it's also how we're looking to really change the system from the inside out. This is something where government is, our US Constitution is based on racial inequity. And so we need to be thinking about reparations and a lot of changing of the process and structure in our traditional pathways of planning to be more effective change agents. And so certainly racial equity, I would say, is the core of our membership and the core of our network, but also all of our staff are trying to collectively work together for this shift.
Okay, so we've had a very strange year here, but I'm just very curious if racial equity is a big part. We had the entire Black Lives Matter movement just huge, just blew up over the summer, and then people are still dealing with pandemic. But with what you're doing, I'm sure, how are you bringing that into what you're doing? It obviously needs to be I mean, you've been doing it even before it sort of became an issue, but you still, I guess there's an acknowledgement, like it's kind of come together in such a big way. Have you had to integrate it in any way?
You know what? I think what's really wonderful about USDN is that it wasn't something that we weren't already doing. I'm thrilled to know that so many other organizations and so many other networks and so many people in my personal life are starting to step up and really take more action around Black Lives Matters and their own sort of power and privilege. But USDN, we have been working on training on power and privilege and implicit bias and thinking about procedural, distributional, and structural equity. It is something we have set the groundwork for years, and we continue to evolve and change. All of us are growing in this work. It's not I don't have all the answers. I'm certainly consistently learning and being educated in the space. Honestly, I'm unlearning most of what I learned in middle school and high school to, be able to do the work more effectively. What I do think is what I can say about the network and what I can say about the staff is we're a little bit like mycelium. We connect and bring together all of these different resources and all of these different people to different size municipalities, to counties, to small cities, to bigger cities. We're sharing those information, those resources. We are looking at the partnerships and the funding, and we're supporting the innovation. And we've been doing that in the racial equity space and integrating into our current work, and then recognizing we don't actually want to integrate into the current systems because those are structured improperly. They're actually structured to be unjust. They're actually structured to continue to hold people down, especially Black, Indigenous people of color. And so that's been part of our evolution. Is initially we thought it was integration. We used to say, take an equity lens. But actually, a lens is something you can take on and off. And what, I say now, and this isn't even quite right either, but, we need this equity LASIK. It needs to be all the time something that we are committed to doing and integrating into our personal and professional lives and into all of those that we're working with. So I won't say that the movement or even COVID necessarily changed the approach. I think that it has made everything speed up, and that our members have become really critical assets to their communities and to their local governments because they have the language, they're going through the training, they have some of the grounding to be able to bring others along. And they also can play in the gray space of the big goals and bringing those down into the everyday right now. We have to get these things done to meet the needs of people who are dealing with the COVID crisis.
Okay, I think we're going to dig into this much deeper, maybe in a future conversation, but I do want to just, give us a little bit of background about hazard mitigation plans. That's part of what you guys do. And first off, define what that is.
Sure. Yeah, I wouldn't say that's like one of the core things we do. I think it's one of the core things we're looking to change. What I will say is the traditional approaches that come from the federal level, and in this case, it's FEMA, is they're very archaic. Right now, we are still functioning in a system where we check boxes and we tell people to come to a community meeting in a space they've never been to, and often in a language they don't that is not their primary language. And so a hazard mitigation plan is something that's actually required for all state, local, and tribal governments. It is mandated from the federal government in order to be eligible for pre-disaster mitigation funding, which has just recently turned into Building Resilience in Communities funding, so the BRIC funding. These plans are updated every 5 years. What they've done, though, this entire time we've had these plans, is they look at the historical hazards, they identify what the hazards are, and then think about how you're going to mitigate the hazard in the future, usually with a focus on police, fire, critical facilities, and infrastructure. So they haven't really done what they're supposed to do for building community resilience. They certainly haven't done what they're supposed to do with adaptation. And so we are utilizing the structure of those plans and the fact that they're mandated to integrate climate change, social equity, and ecological considerations into the plan. And USDN has worked with members and with staff to create a structure where our members, it's a choose your own adventure structure, if you've ever read those books as a kid, where you can go through and identify your level of ambition, how far you're willing to go, what can your leadership get behind, but also to make these plans proactive versus reactive, to utilize our federal money in a way that's actually going to benefit us and be working towards climate action instead of being reactive and continuing to just focus on infrastructure that gets taken out in 10, 15 years because it's not adequate. So that's one project.
Well, and I guess a follow-up is just, if these plans are required every 5 years, it seems like you're trying to make these things better, but is there a need to actually change the legislation or the policy? Is that an area that you guys get into, or is it nimble enough for you to just do what you just described?
Well, we are certainly trying to work with a lot of different partners in this space. We are not a lobbying organization, so we partner with a lot of other organizations, but our focus is really on supporting peer networking, innovation, and actually getting to action. We do work with other groups, and we have certainly had meetings, and actually have a meeting with FEMA next week to talk about what we are doing and why we want to do this, but it's a conversation we've been having for 5 years also. So I'm hoping with the administration change and this dedication to social equity and climate change from the administration that we have a lot more support, and also that they're able to utilize that framework and sort of roll it out rather than waiting, because we don't have any more time. There's so much work that needs to be done right now.
Okay, and you've touched upon this a little bit, but what you do, and as I've seen the images, people coming together, a lot of smiling faces, people working closely. We live in the age of COVID where you can't do that anymore. How have you adjusted? Is it just terrible in that respect, or you just because it seems like a missed opportunity to make personal connections, but we've adjusted somewhat. But what does it COVID mean for you and how you do your job?
Yeah, I think for all of us, it's an adjustment. I thrive on the energy of working with people, and I imagine some of the images that are coming up that I can't see are from our trainings that we do with the Game of Extremes and the Game of Heat, and some other interactive sessions that we do with members. We have really transitioned into a lot of online capacity building, leadership skills. We've done some shifting into self-care work, especially as our members are dealing with a whole lot of complex issues of, again, kind of working in a space around being champions and change agents, and also, potentially having children and animals and all the things crawling over them, and being incredible parents or leaders. So we have transitioned into a lot of online support. Some of our actual programming has changed to serve the needs of members immediately in this right now, as we continue to work on some of the other big pieces. But as I mentioned before, it's programming for the survive in addition to the cure. It's doing both and trying to function in that gray space. And that's really what we're trying to do, is also be an adaptable organization, and to make sure that as things change under our feet, we're able to change along with them. So I'm very grateful, and I'm very lucky that I get to work with this amazing organization. I'm very lucky that a lot of the things that I do can be put online. But a lot of our members are still out trying to really make a difference on the ground, and wearing their masks and doing the distancing, and focusing on trying to shift power into the hands of the community the best they can amidst a global pandemic, which none of us have had before.
Well, we're toward the end of the episode, but I wanted to just get your feedback too on. I think you're quite active in the adaptation community and what it means to be an adaptation professional, and quite I don't think I'm telling you anything, that it's quite a a white demographic, and I hope that's changing. Do you have a chance, especially in the communities that you're working with, sort of giving people ideas that there are opportunities for you in climate change and being a professional? You get a chance to do that kind of mentorship.
Yeah, I'm really lucky that I continue to live in Baltimore. I worked for the city for a while, but a lot of the work that I do on the side is working with a lot of the community-based partners and community members that I interacted with when I was with the city. Certainly, I think it's important to restructure a lot of the way that we're looking at effectiveness, a lot of the way that we're looking at whether a project is successful. I'm really against the idea of best practices, because best practices are based on a set of circumstances that aligned in a specific way. So I think if we're restructuring the way that we even collect stories and the way that we provide opportunities for people, the more they see themselves in this space, in the climate adaptation space. And so there's a lot of work that we've been doing with Johns Hopkins and with some of the other community-based partners here in my city and in several cities, to do citizen science, to bring in young people, to have them not feel just devastated by the news, but to actually see themselves in an active role of understanding the place that they play in the system, and that they're part of the bigger sort of ecological system as well. And so the more that we shift into that and provide those opportunities, and I think in a couple episodes later, we'll talk about some of the Resilience Hubs work. That's a great way to bring in, I think, young people, people in neighborhoods, and those on the front lines that have some of the best knowledge and best information, and certainly I think even indigenous knowledge, to restructure the way that we're doing things. And I think it could be more effective that way.
That's fantastic. And just even capturing that process, I think, would be useful for other communities and such. But I mean, that's what you're doing with the network and all. But Pasha, this has been a fantastic conversation. I want to bring you into just chatting. It's just our way of closing out the episode, but I look forward to our future conversations. And I think, even beyond some of the topics that you've given us, you and I could brainstorm on a whole suite of things that we could talk about that I think would be useful. But thanks for what you're doing, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see you.
All right, just hold on. Okay, I just have to close out the episode. That's why we that time flies by, like that. So why I have you on some of those other topics, and so the resource hubs. That's one of the conversations that you were chatting about. To whole kind of a whole episode around what are some of those, because people are listening now.
Yeah. I put it in the chat for you, but it's resilience hubs. And basically, I think this is one of the ones that you'll probably find a lot more people interested in it from lots of different areas. I'll throw in the website for you as well, because that's one that we don't have behind our firewall. But essentially, we've had so many disruptions. People don't evacuate. They don't go to emergency shelters, these places, because they don't trust them. Baltimore is a really wonderful example of people not trusting government for very good reason. Our redlining and white block ordinance, has been catastrophic for the city. So these are community spaces that are often sometimes owned by community partners or different organizations and run by members of the community. They're intended to focus entirely on increasing community adaptive capacity, relationship building, sort of having a node that people can go to in the year round for their everyday needs. And then they're enhanced in the event of a disruption to have access to power, to have deliveries, to have access to resources. They're not intended to take over for shelters, and they're not intended to be just for the emergency. These are year-round functioning spaces, but we're bringing in the sort of solar and storage. We're bringing in the big communications components. And then we're also thinking about these maker spaces and learning spaces so that members of the community are actually having the power shifted into their hands, and they're building up their relationships and their capacity to handle and withstand the impacts.
So with these meetings that you have, I imagine the different community members come up and they talk about, these are our concerns, we're a population, and these are the issues. Have you had anyone from the trans community come up and talk about their issues related to, resilience planning and climate change? Has that been a demographic that you've talked to?
From the trans community?
Yeah.
Through a different avenue in my life. Not necessarily through USDN, but I have a friend who's a lawyer with the ACLU and has been working on trans rights for a while, but not specifically related to this project.
Well, and the reason I bring it up, some of the things you were saying, and I did an episode in New Orleans, and one of the people I interviewed was a trans man, and he was talking about some of the unique challenges when extreme storm events come through, and even getting an ID, like just something as simple that we all take for granted. That it's very, nothing you don't know. Like trans community it's poor and it's impoverished, and even getting an ID. So when you're moving around in a storm, you can't go stay at a hotel because you don't have and that was part of the episode that I shared. And, I'm just curious, there's all sorts of adaptation planning going around, and just, I was encouraging on the podcast, like if you've heard of any of your plans where they included even the specific related to trans, but I haven't heard much. And it's obviously not a huge population, but still it's not that hard to sort of say, hey, consider this.
Yeah, one of the things, not in the Resilience Hub one, but in the one we talk about, the Nexus, that's actually focusing a lot on all frontline communities, who I would believe trans is a frontline community, but LGBTQ plus, like making different sort of outreach and strategies for different populations that have been made more vulnerable due to our policies and practices. I know you had Ciders on earlier today, I'm doing a piece for her book that's a lot around changing the language and even the way that we talk about some of these things, because it's exclusionary language. And so I think certainly what the Nexus is looking at is addressing all of these different sort of populations that have been made vulnerable and not treating them as a one size fits all or labeling everybody as vulnerable.
Mm. And the Ciders came out about 3 weeks ago, so.
Oh, really? I popped up on my thing earlier today, so I was like, "Oh, sweet, they're talking." But
you know what happens is when we share on social media, we have phases, and so when the episode's ready, we'll share that. But then we put material out on podcasts too, and there might be a delay. And maybe you saw like some tweet that's like "Cider's out on the podcast." So I'm just
I'm working with Cider on her book, and I'm writing a chapter on the fact that we need to change the language in this space. It cannot continue to be managed retreat or even strategic relocation, because there's so much history in that language around people being managed. And you think about slavery, you think about transcontinental railroad, all these other things. And so we need to be more sensitive just in that approach, and then that changes the sensitivity of the process and it's more respectful. And I think that's a big thing the adaptation field can do differently than the greenhouse gas mitigation field.
I feel like managed retreat is it's setting though. It's baking in as a term. I mean, I get your point, but I sense out there, and like, are you involved with, the Columbia did their big managed retreat conference a couple of years ago, and they're planning a next one coming up. Are you part of that? And are you speaking out saying, don't call it managed retreat?
I am not on the planning committee for that. There's only so much capacity and time I have in myself, but I have made it really clear to Ciders and team, and then also the Climate Migration Network, that I think it's a really important thing that we're running into with our community members. And I'm working all the way Hawaii, Florida, Michigan, all these places that are dealing, even Alaska. We have members in Alaska that are dealing right now every day. And we can't get the politicians behind managed retreat because retreat is giving up. And if you look at any politician, they're never going to say, I'm willing to retreat. Build back stronger, And so that's a lot of what I'm talking with her about, is like, we need to think about who are the different stakeholders, the different decision makers, and then who are the people who are actually on the front lines, and how are we thinking about the language shifting to be more respectful.
And in that side of it, I need to think about a lot more, but just the whole notion of, a politician not acknowledging retreat and stuff. And I'm not married to that term, but I'm from Florida, and like, I just, whatever it takes to sort of say life is not going to go back to normal over the next 20, 30, 40 years. And you are going to have to retreat to that, from that coastline, and forget the managed part of it. And so who has that tough conversation with them that you just can't climate proof everything indefinitely? And so that's what I like the concept around it. I'm not married to the term managed retreat, but just sort of like adaptation's different. It's not resilience. I think I had some notes that you have issues with resilience, and I spent a lot of time on my podcast just raging against like the 3,000 definitions of resilience. And I like adaptation because it lends itself more to saying, well, maybe you do become more resilient, but maybe you retreat from an area too. So anyway.
Yeah, I think the thing that I will always tell you in local government is we still have to play to the politicians. And, we can get a lot of work done in local government without the leadership and without the sort of commitments. But if there is that, it's a lot easier to do it. And so whenever we bring something language-wise to them where they immediately think of themselves as weak, or they're not able to have the time to do that sort of emotional processing because they're put on the spot, it's much less likely to be successful.
No, I agree. And I just imagine the mayor of Miami, and if you're talking 7 feet of sea level rise or whatever, I'm sure you're familiar with it, but just the geology, there's no putting a seawall around Miami, and but a mayor's not going to run on, okay, let's evacuate these islands first, but at the same time, that water's coming. It's coming. Yeah.
The Keys are really being innovative right now. They're not investing anymore in certain things. And I think we're starting to see that with these islands where it doesn't fiscally make sense anymore, and we're starting to remove services, and that becomes something where it's more gradual, but we're not going to have that sort of timeline anymore. We have to then build in, like, it's more immediate. We're going to, Eastern Shore of Maryland is an example where they're starting to take away services from certain areas because they're not going to provide trash and recycling, which doesn't exist anymore, but trash service to like 4 people who refuse to move.
I got to let you go in a second here, but I'm just curious your thoughts. I think the news just came out today or yesterday. It's just John Hopkins and the whole slave. Oh, did you catch this news story? And I'm just, is that playing? How's that playing in Baltimore?
I think most people in Baltimore have always known that Johns Hopkins owned slaves, and that Johns Hopkins in itself is a pretty racist institution, quite honestly. But that's people who live here. I think the mentality from the outside is that Johns Hopkins is incredible. And so it blew a lot of people's minds outside of the city. For those in the city, we know that when new students come into Hopkins, they're told, don't go into these neighborhoods. They're dangerous. They play a double edge there. And I think I certainly wasn't surprised by it. I think it's been interesting, though, the conversations I've had today, there have been a few around it. And it's usually people being like, were you surprised? And I'm like, not one bit.
Well, I'm surprised that it was like, like they didn't know some things, but there's this movement to change names and stuff. And I'm like, wow, would they change Johns Hopkins University's name? And I associate it with a good medical school. I have I don't know all the history that you're talking about. So anyway, we'll see what happens, right?
You're a great medical school. I don't think the name in itself is something that would change as much as like changing the Cleveland Indians or some other like very derogatory terms. But I do think the idea that Hopkins has to deal with their racist history, just like we have to deal with that in all of these different areas and in all of our institutions, is really important.
I didn't explore Baltimore as much as I should, but when I did go there, that like going downtown, there's some nice little side neighborhoods with some great little restaurants and such that I don't think people, because you get there and it's like the ballpark and all that, but you just kind of get off and there's some cute areas. So
yeah, if you ever come back, I'll take you on the real tour.
Oh, excellent. Well, fall the earliest, but yeah, I'll take you up on that for sure. And if you get out to Tucson, I'll take you on some hikes. Well, you know the area, but I'll show you around there too. I'm going to let you go, but this has been fantastic, and this should be available hopefully within a couple days. We're going to share on our social media, but please do share and plant it somewhere. I think it's nicely, you express nicely what you guys are doing, so I hope, please share it in that respect. And then I think we actually even have on the calendar future interviews, so you're going to get
we have one in January and one in February or March.
Hopefully you won't get tired of me and that Doug again and his predictable questions. No, we'll have fun with it, and it'll get more relaxed too. It gets more fun. So, and if you have ideas how you want to unfold, we're very flexible and simpatico. If you have maybe community members you think would make great guests too, that would complement our discussions, we are using simpatico as a platform to encourage all these things. So keep that in mind.
Sounds great. We have a lot of amazing members too. So if there's anything that you need some great members, I'm happy to also bring them on.
Let's get diverse, and I'm seriously, let's do that. And if we can use our connections with people like you that are out there, that would be very helpful. So, okay, I'm going to let you go. And this was fantastic. You have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye. You can just sign out of StreamYard. All right, folks, that is a wrap for me for today. What a fantastic day. Appreciate it. Was nice connecting with Kristen. I usually just see her at events and such, so it's nice we have a solid conversation. But I need to get off because we've got Lee coming right up. Latinas for Climate Action and Justice, Lee Constable, an Australia Climate Change channel. And I want to thank you for all tuning in, and I will see you next time. You all have a great day.